HIV is just a virus, and it doesn't matter who you are, how much education you have, how much money you have, or what your orientation is. It really doesn't matter. That's why it's called the human immunodeficiency virus. And it's spread sexually. So with whomever you are having sex with, that's what you're going to get, primarily. And if you are shooting drugs, or I actually had a client who was a diabetic, and he was shooting his insulin, and he had a roommate who was HIV positive who didn't tell him, and the roommate was a drug shooter. Now this was in Texas at the time. And he didn't know that his roommate was using his syringes. And so he actually got HIV through that route. And because of Texas being who it is, his roommate was given a life sentence for that. Remember, this is just a virus. See, this is the problem when law even treats. And in fact, there's going to be, if it hasn't happened already, there's a big meeting in New York right now to talk about the legal implications of being HIV positive, because you've got states in the United States that will put you in prison. Well, you know what? They don't do that for anything else. That's health related. If I sneeze on you and I've got like a swine flu or something, I'm not going to jail for that. If everyone is educated, you will always ask a question and you will always wear a condom. If you have all the tools you need, you will always protect yourself. You don't have to worry about the other person. At what point do we own our own behavior? Early childhood care, this has all been determined by the World Health Organization. Education, food security, housing, just to name a few. And these can also be tied to, if you understand human rights, this is tied to human rights too. Income inequality, social inclusion and exclusion, employment and job security. Is this not huge for everyone right now? Yes. They have shown that people are smoking more. People who had quit smoking are smoking again. People are drinking more. They're just not drinking in the bars because it's too expensive. So they go to the grocery store and buy their booze and stay at home. They're also drugging more. That's tied to joblessness. And then working conditions, something that people don't like to discuss. And this all impacts somebody's risk for HIV, because if you're not working and you ain't got no money, you get a little depressed. Some people get involved in survival sex. Some people start doing more drug using. It's all about bandaging that pain that you feel from not being able to make a living. And then for us giving them crap because they are. This is just kind of a little listing of the social determinants. In the middle of that is the disparities. But here all around those disparities are the poor health outcomes, rural-urban status, geographic location, disease, violence, access to care, disability, race, ethnicity, education, living conditions, income, cultural practice, sexual orientation, age, working conditions, gender. It goes on and on and on. But you can see that all those things impact who we are and what happens, our actual life conditions, impact our health outcomes. This is not something simple. This is not a just say no response. The group that's growing the fastest is Latinos. But you're not the only ones growing the fastest. Blacks finally are almost at 5% of the population. And then also natives went down a little bit, but Asians even went up. This is the state of Arizona right now, folks. In terms of health rankings, this is even updated. Health rankings is something DHS does. We look at 70 indicators, and those indicators tell us kind of where groups are at in terms of their health ranking. Are they doing okay? Are they doing badly? How are they looking? These red numbers are the worse than average numbers, and over here are the better than average, and then this is kind of the average right in here. Up here is the Asian. Asians do better than anyone in this state. It's also a smaller number than anyone, but they really overall do so much better than any other group in terms of their health. Then whites are second with that. Latinos are actually in the middle when it comes to health. So top 5 causes of death by ethnicity. This chart actually changed from the last time I'd seen it, because across used to be diseases of the heart, and now, as you can see, cancer is there for Asians and for whites. Where it used to be diseases of the heart for all the groups. Actually, we're seeing some improvements with some of our groups. And actually with all of our groups, there's some improvement. This is kind of hard to see, but that's stroke. That's all stroke. And then Alzheimer's is kind of number 5. Unintentional injury has actually moved up. That's what I was talking about. unintentional injury, especially for Native Americans and not for Latinos, are showing up as a high priority problem. And even with whites. This is kind of where we're at. And in terms of, and these are the rates per 100,000. For Latinos, it really is kind of staying in the middle. The African Americans have the worst numbers in the state. The other numbers I saw the other day that really concerned me was Latinas, pregnant Latinas are having very poor health outcomes. That's not something I used to see years ago. I think it's lack of services, young women afraid to go in for services. The congenital syphilis that had really disappeared years ago has come back. And Arizona was one of 5 states in the whole country that was saying congenital syphilis, most of which was with Latinas. And I think it's something that we need to take a hard look at. It impacts your young women's risk for HIV if they're walking around with syphilis, having babies born with syphilis, and they don't even know they have it. Whatever they did to get the syphilis, whatever they did to get pregnant is what they will do to get HIV. So how do we address that? How do we talk about that, especially with young women who are Catholic? For cardiovascular disease, blacks have the highest numbers. They're pretty bad. But Latinos are real close for cardiovascular. Also, what they're finding is that stress has a lot to do with someone's risk for cardiovascular disease. If you have time, look up something called ethnostress. Ethnostress is something that was actually discovered by social scientists out of Canada. And they were looking at the health outcomes of their indigenous people and trying to understand what was going on with their indigenous people, that no matter what was going on in terms of their economy or whatever, their health outcomes were so bad. Well, they discovered something called ethnostress, tied to the history of those folks within that country in terms of how they've been oppressed, the realities of racism in the country. All those oppressions add up to something that they now deem as ethnostress. And they're now taking that definition and using it for people of color in the United States. No matter who you are, if you ain't white, you probably dealt with some kind of ethnostress. Now, you can't define it. In fact, one thing that they're finding is that depression runs through all groups of color. Okay? That impacts your cardiovascular system. Kaiser did a study several years ago where they looked at African Americans. And it didn't matter how much money they made or not. What they found was that their risk for having a heart attack was exactly the same whether we were wealthy or not. Ethnostress is something that all of us are feeling. All of us are living with. How do we best deal with the ethnostress? Cervical cancer, actually Latinos have higher numbers in cervical cancer. In fact, when they did research into smoking in the LGBT community, the folks with the highest numbers of the highest rates of smoking were actually Latinos. And then colorectal cancer, actually whites actually see higher numbers, but then blacks are number 2 for that. In terms of HIV/AIDS rates, black folks have the highest rates. We just do. We do it nationally, and we have it locally. And it's been that way for some time. What happens is many people who fall in love and want to spend the rest of their lives together and have children don't get tested for STDs and HIV before marriage. You can live with the virus for 10 years, and I know most of you guys know this, 10 plus years and be asymptomatic. No symptoms whatsoever. You can walk around thinking you're totally healthy and there's nothing wrong. Just so that you're very clear, the rates around HIV are highest in this community. In terms of primary and secondary rates of syphilis, and Arizona was in the top 5 for syphilis for years. I mean, and we still stay there. I'm just baffled by it. But especially since syphilis really had gone away, how did we go find it? And, you know, I don't understand it. Okay, so black folks, again, the highest numbers. Latinos are pretty much tied with American Indians, but understand that Indians have fairly high rates when it comes to STDs. Then the rates of gonorrhea, this just upset me. Here's African American rates of gonorrhea. Rates of chlamydia, black and American Indian, and the Latinos are right here in the middle. They're high. Those rates are high for chlamydia within this community. When you're looking at determinants for UMA, you determine what your determinants are. You know who your people are. You need to look at what matters to them, what affects their lives, and what do we need to address around that.